Hello and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. This week, it's an idea endorsed by the Prime Minister, even by the Chief Election Commissioner. Simultaneous elections to the Lok Sabha and state assemblies seems to make eminent financial and practical sense. Yet the big question, does this make constitutional and political sense? To debate that, joining me is Mr. Tarun Vijay of the BJP, Manish Tewari of the Congress, Mr. Sukhendu Sekhar Roy of the Trinamool Congress. Also with me, former Chief Election Commissioner Navin Chawla and Naina Lal Kidwai, well-known corporate leader. Thank you all very much for coming in. Mr. Vijay, this week we've had an interesting development in Uttarakhand, where you're Rajya Sabha MP from, which illustrates the problems of what the Prime Minister now and Mr. Advani earlier had endorsed, simultaneous elections. What happens in a case like this when a government president's rule was imposed just a few months before elections were due, and now the court has overruled it? So what would happen in a case like this? How does the BJP see something, simultaneous elections in the case of something like Uttarakhand?
See, Parliament Standing Committee has already discussed this, and previously other committees had also pondered over it. There is a case that if such a situation arises, then either you club it prior to the appointed date of the election or extend the assembly like that. And there has to be a constitutional provision for that, because at the present the extension of assembly cannot be done except in an emergency situation. So my idea is that once we make up our mind that the simultaneous elections are good for the country, we save money, we save time, we save all those things, because everyone constantly remains in an election gear. Whether it's assembly election or Lok Sabha election, then panchayat elections, then local bodies elections. So there is a very little time to govern and policy making. So let that time be spared, and once most of the parties are very happily agreeable on it, and once we make up our mind that simultaneous elections are good for the country, then the way will be found.
Do you think it would take away perhaps a centre's prerogative to impose president's rule? I mean, there's lots of dispute about when a centre should impose president's rule. The Congress faced attack when they were in the power and did it. The BJP will face questions now when you're in power and done it. We've just seen it happen recently in Arunachal as well. Does it then take away the centre's power in a sense? Does it? Would any government be willing to give that up despite what the Prime Minister says?
See, it's not a power like a Bashash's bakshish. President's rule is something which the government finds that it's necessary, then they impose it. Till 67, we were having continuously simultaneous elections to Lok Sabha and Assembly. 142 times or more than that, the assemblies were dissolved through presidential decree and other things. Many Supreme Court judgments have come this side or that side, favoring this party or that party. There have been many divergent viewpoints on it. But present rule remains a prerogative of the government. At the same time, the governments should be very careful about it, and if there is a crisis like it happened in Uttarakhand, the 9 Congress MLAs were not taken care of the Congress party. It's not our business to see that Congress house is put in order. It's their business, their party, and their leaders should take care of it. And the Chief Minister was found doing horse trading on camera, and the city was found to be very genuine by Central Forensic Laboratory. So if the government thinks that this is a clear-cut case, the money bill has fell, speaker has done something wrong and there is a constitutional crisis, then the government in power is fully in right to take a decision according to its wisdom. So, but at the same time, simultaneous elections do not confront this kind of a, or do not come in clash with this kind of a situation, because once you have found out a way out that assembly and Lok Sabha elections must be held concurrently, and there can be some kind of extension of the assembly elections, or they can be held prior to the appointed electoral date, then I think it needs a consensus.
Manish Tewari, come in, because in a sense the Congress would be the original sinner in single quotes, because as Mr. Vijay made the point, till 1967 we did have simultaneous elections, but after that there was a period of, say, political instability, governments being dismissed, etc., which then became almost a situation where a government is in permanent campaign mode, regardless of which government it is.
Well, both conceptually and constitutionally, this is an eminently bad idea, notwithstanding the problem that because of the code of conduct, the central government perhaps belabors under it for 30 months of its 60 months rule, considering that different states.
So that's 50%.
Yeah, 50%. But you see, ultimately, if you step back and look at it constitutionally, if I recall Article 1 correctly, it says India, that is Bharat, will be a union of the states. So therefore, there is an intrinsic principle of federalism which the constitution makers respected. Now, under those circumstances, suppose if an assembly or if a government was to fall on the floor of the assembly, let's say 2.5 years to its term, then would it be legitimate, moral, to ask the legislators to cobble together some kind of a majority to keep some government in place for the remaining 2.5 years? Now, let me...
Just a point of the standing committee headed by a Congress MP actually gave recommendations for that. They said if you have a no confidence motion, have a confidence motion with an alternative along with it.
Well, with all due respects to the standing committee, my view is that it is constitutionally and politically a very bad idea. Number two, presuming, let us suppose the national government was to fall on the floor of Parliament. Now, would you have a combination of ideologically disparate forces coming together because of certain constitutional fiat that proscribes that the term of Parliament should be 5 years, and even if a government falls on the floor of the House, notwithstanding that it doesn't reflect the political reality any longer, a government has to continue to function? I do not think that is...
But that happens in political alliances all the time.
Well, I don't think it's morally legitimate. Ultimately, if there is an alliance, that alliance is voluntary. Here you are having a coercive alliance because of a certain structural formulation which you want to put in place. Then there is another difficulty. You see, you are already having huge problems with the 10th schedule. The 10th schedule had its virtues, but it has also ended up constricting the freedom of individual members of Parliament. You cannot vote according to your conscience, your constituency, or your common sense. It's actually whip-driven tyranny. Now, in such a situation, the whip-driven tyranny is going to get even further perpetuated because, you will be compelled to continue with some kind of an arrangement which your own conscience or even the political reality may not agree to.
I'm going to pick up on the third point of common sense, because you said it's not constitutionally and politically viable. But Mr. Roy, if you could come in. The point Manish Tewari just mentioned about 50% of a government's term being under the Code of Conduct, we're seeing that in West Bengal, where you have a multi-phase election, where in fact the Code of Conduct has been in place from early March till the 19th of May. Why does the Trinamool then and other regional parties, do you not find yourself bound by the fact that you are, first as a central election, you'll campaign for your MPs, then there's a election which comes in the state and your 2 months as Code of Conduct because it's multi-phase? Hasn't something got to change?
No. Principally, I agree with you that ideal situation would have been to hold the elections simultaneously. But as mentioned by Manish and Tarun Vijay, that since 1967, for the past 48 years, we have been derailed from the constitutional mechanism which was evolved by the founding fathers of our constitution. They could not foresee that such a situation may emerge. But once it has emerged due to coalition governments in different states in 1967 onwards, and fall of the governments, the withdrawal of support by the alliance partners or for imposition of president's rule, now it has become a fait accompli that we cannot go beyond the scope of holding elections at different point of time. Although
why? The Prime Minister wants to change it.
No.
Why doesn't Mamata Banerjee back it?
Whether I like it, whether I welcome this or not, it is immaterial. In view of the fact, we have to abide by the constitutional provisions. Article 83(2) and Article 172(1). These articles of the Constitution clearly provides for 5-year tenure to Lok Sabha and their state assemblies. And the Parliament does not have the power.
Unless dissolved earlier.
Unless dissolved earlier. Even the Parliament does not have the power to go for amending these provisions of the Constitution, because that will hit the basic structure of the Constitution. And since the judgment of Keshavananda Bharati onwards, there are, in umpteen number of cases, Supreme Court has held that the Parliament cannot bring any amendment which will nullify the basic structure of the Constitution. And what are the basic structures that have also been defined and enumerated by different rulings of the Apex Court?
So, of course, the Law Commission has looked at the distortions and evils and has suggested also remedies. But I just want to bring in, before we go to Mr. Chawla, Naina Lal Kidwai as an outsider to this world of politics and perhaps somebody who just wants to see things done or India getting back on track. When you find, and it's been an interesting time, of course, that with the Prime Minister, in a sense, is also the most popular face or the campaigner in chief of the BJP. And when he first, when he just came into power in 2014, he faced the Delhi elections and then the Bihar elections where he campaigned extensively. He's cut down now. But in a sense, do you think that this, for India to be in permanent election mode, I mean, there are at least 3 elections every year, does it work for India?
Well, clearly, I would say no, because if you have everybody in your top leadership stuck in some mode or other, electioneering, it's got to be a distraction. But even worse, it's through the code of conduct. I mean, just a very simple example which struck me was in some of the work I do in sanitation, that the collector even stopped sanctioning a toilet in Madhya Pradesh for a period of 2 months, lest it be construed that this is in some way part of the code. So everything seizes up, so that, you know, you're trying to make a village open defecation free, that seizes, and the villagers are all asking for a toilet which they can't get because the subsidy has absolutely stopped. So imagine that if it boils down to execution at such a minor and small level, what the implications are in terms of administration when you've got the code of conduct in play at various stages across the country for these elections. I do believe that there is a second aspect, and that is this sort of turmoil gets reported in very strange ways abroad. And for whatever reason, elections make for a hotbed of allegations back and forth. And there's so much noise out of India that looking at it outside in as well, I know that I spend a lot of time explaining to investors abroad how they shouldn't heed this, and this is just a state election or a municipal election, and this is just part of democracy and politics and noise and media and whatever. But we are just perennially on the boil with something or other as a result. And all of this gets in the way, to my mind, of progress and moving ahead. Now, I hear the issues in terms of, I think the Constitution clearly had not maybe looked at what would emerge for all the reasons that has happened. How we align it back to where it was originally to have been, simultaneous, is something we must apply our minds to. And I hope if everybody wants it, we find a solution. I mean, I would not like to believe we can throw up our hands saying, hey, you know, the courts have decreed it, the Constitution doesn't permit it, so it is what it is. And maybe we look at, if it's issues around security, which I'm also heard that it's not possible sometimes to just do it in that way. Let's look at e-voting, which many countries have. Does the Aadhaar card now give us some linkages which permit us to move into a mode which enables us at least to take care of some of those traditional old reasons why maybe holding it, the logistic issues, why we couldn't do it.
Of course, and the Prime Minister had made that point also of rural bodies as well in panchayats. Mr. Chawla, the final word of this first round, in a way, with you. Dr. Qureshi has made the point that though he thinks it makes eminent sense, he doesn't feel it's feasible. But we know the current Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Zaidi, has said that one of the reasons he would like to see this happen is the costs and the prohibitive costs as elections get more and more expensive. One guesstimate is 4,500 crores. Others say it's nearer to 30,000 crores. If you look at all the other expenses involved in campaigns and political parties funding, do you think if there's political will that this could actually happen, given the reasons we've discussed around the table, but could there be a political will to actually make this happen? And why do you think it is important for it to happen or not?
Well, having heard everybody on this round table today, I'm not sure that there will be political will, but I hope that we can have it. Because as Dr. Zaidi has said, and I do endorse that, elections have become prohibitively expensive. And while that's something else that we might debate separately, the fact is that if you can have these elections simultaneously, both for assembly, because every party is allowed the recognized parties are allowed star campaigners, 20 campaigners, and so that expense is borne by the party, but it's coming from somewhere, and there is individual costs. And if this could be merged once in 5 years, from the election commission point of view and from, say, my standpoint, it would be an ideal situation. The other thing is we are not happy with a model code of conduct going on for months, certainly many weeks at a time, but from the time the bugle is sounded till the time it's ended, we've recently seen can be 2 months. Now that's a lot of time.
And interestingly, the election commission becomes a political rival. We've seen Mamata Banerjee take on the election commission almost as much as she's taken on the Congress and
Well, I
left.
was taken on by somebody every day. So that's part of the job in the election commission. So that is part of the turf. But the other thing here was that, for example, when I did the 2009 election, I could see that the government had come to a complete halt. So I tried to set up a mechanism between the cabinet secretary and every ministry where nobody was doing anything, as Naina has said. And it was very frustrating even for me to put up that mechanism to say, okay, look, short of a calamity, this can go on. But by now, it's permeated so deep into our system of administration, down to the sub-collector, down to the SDM, that koi kuch nahi karta. Everybody wants to say, let's lay hands off because the election commission will come and our careers will be ruined. So we become a big hawa, which we could have done without. But now the difficulties. All the difficulties have already been spelled out. So it requires major constitutional change. We have 5-year terms. The Lok Sabha is mandated for 5 years. If it's dissolved, say, after 2 years, we have no provisions in the Constitution for President's rule at the center. And if there are provisions for President rule in the states, but for how long? If, let's say, I know that Dr. Qureshi gave that extreme example of a 13-day government of Mr. Vajpayee, but if I weren't to look at an extreme example of that kind, and we were to say that the government, for various reasons, the central government falls after 2 years, as we've seen through the late 90s, then are we going to have elections again and again? Clearly not.
Interestingly, perhaps, because that example of coalition governments is a point well taken. But Mr. Vijay, have we entered a new phase, perhaps? Because again, in a government with a 282 majority, it seems a time where where voters have voted in states as well as in the centre for decisive majority. So that's an interesting shift in that phase of coalition politics. And the point Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai made and others have made also about the election, with the country permanently in election mode, besides the fact that no work gets done, the kind of vitriol, negative rhetoric. In fact, the Prime Minister can be very statesman-like when he's talks as Prime Minister, but we've seen on campaign trail, everyone, whether it's the Congress party president, the Prime Minister, etc., all very aggressive and negative in a sense. And the point made about communalism, casteism, the worst kind of rhetoric, I mean, somehow elections bring out the worst in us. I don't know why, but they do. And the rise of that is not good for India. But can the BJP be different? I mean, it's all very well to say this, but how can you actually make sure that this happens? We know that this has gone to the Home Ministry, but they said, let's leave it for a standing committee and we'll look at it later. Is it just about it sounding good? Is it going to actually happen?
No, we very much like it to pursue vigorously because we mean it. And my friends have pointed out a couple of issues. If there is a whip tyranny when simultaneous elections occur, then every whip can be looked either as a tyranny or as a disciplinarian instruction. Every day we are asked to vote for a certain bill or to oppose a certain move in the parliament. So that apart, and if Lok Sabha dissolves after 2 years, then what happens after that? And the diametrically opposed to each other ideologically parties have to come together. But it happens every day. BJP and PDP in Kashmir, right? There is no ideological confluence, but there is a common minimum agenda. Left and Congress in Bengal, there is no ideological symmetry, but just because of the electoral benefit and some kind of alliance that will benefit them in the elections, they join together even when there is no simultaneous electoral mechanism in vogue. So what I am saying that for the national good, there has to be a common minimum program amongst all the parties. Poverty, backwardness, illiteracy, unhealthy situations, we can face them all together with much more strength if lakhs and lakhs of crores are not spent in the 5-tier electoral exercises. It becomes a Chunavi tamasha every second month, every third month, and then every top leader of every party has to be called to campaign. So where is the time? So there are difficulties, of course. Every new thing, noble thing will face hurdles, will face some difficulties. But if all the minds come together for the country's interest, then there can be a way out of it, and it has to be found, because like America, of course it has a two-party system. We don't have that kind of a system. But simultaneous elections means saving a huge amount of public money that can be diverted to the public good for schools, water, electricity, and other things, and then the play of money and the power in the electoral game, it will certainly come down. India needs a huge and a very strong electoral reforms, and this will be one big milestone.